Good evening, comrades. We are beginning today's program, the 30th lecture of the series, and we shall start the program now. Beloved comrade Rajan Nagar, President of the All India Bank Employees Association, Chief guest and lecturer of this webinar today, Dr. Comrade RaviRaman, and all the office bearers, other our guest friends who have joined this webinar, and also our members and other participants in this seminar. Good evening to all of you. Today we have come to the fag end of the program, the 30th of this program, and we have a very interesting subject today on this evening program today. And to talk to us, we have a very eminent economist and scholarly person, Dr. RaviRaman, to talk to us. And today the coordinator was to be Comrade Ajay Manjrekar. He is otherwise now a little preoccupied. So I would request Comrade K.S. Krishna, our Joint Secretary. Incidentally, Krishna is also coming from Trivandrum, and Doctor is also coming from Trivandrum. So that way nice. And I request Comrade Krishna to coordinate and conduct today's webinar. Welcome to all of you. Over to Comrade Krishna.
Thank you, Comrade C.H. Venkatachalam. So this is the 29th day of our month-long webinar series on the part of guest lecturers. So as we know, for the last 1 month, we are commemorating the 52nd anniversary of the bank nationalization in a very prominent manner with many thought leaders, opinion makers participating in the program. And today, as Comrade C.H. Venkatachalam, General Secretary of AIBEA, was explaining, we have got a very eminent scholar. He's a scholar, he's a teacher, he's an author, a planner, all in one like that. Very versatile personality, a public spirited, more than above, a public spirited individual, self-effacing and unassuming in all his dealings with people. And as a scholar, he is a MA Economics and a doctorate in global capital and labor. Like in that thesis, he has acquired a doctorate. And as a teacher, he's not only teaching, he has taught in very prominent universities like Oxford, Manchester, Cambridge universities. He's a visiting fellow and faculty there. And incidentally, he is a fellow at a Center for Development Studies in Kerala, and that's a very prominent institution in Kerala also. And beyond that, in Delhi, he was a director of the Institute of Applied Manpower Research and Planning under the Planning Commission. And then he was in a Norwegian university also. He was dealing with the Department of Anthropology. So many, as an authoritative teacher, he has taught in so many worldwide universities. And as an author, I don't know how many articles he has published. And he has published so many books, not only in India. Such books are published by global authors, world famous authors, especially based on Britain. So many books. And so you can search the Google Scholar. So today I just went through that, but I couldn't count the number of articles he has published all these years. So many number of years, so many number of articles. So as an author and a publisher, has so many articles, and he's presently in the planning board of Kerala, and he's dealing with the transport, labor welfare, public portfolio, and an authentic thought leader. In Kerala, he is being invited for all our television channel programs. He's a very authoritative speaker on planning, development subjects. On a wide range of themes, he has touched agrarian studies, labor studies, social movements, policy and development, business and labor history, environmental studies, international migration, oppressed communities. Like that, I can narrate so many things. So I am stopping with this. So we are very fortunate today. A very versatile personality, a great scholar, has come to our platform to address us. And incidentally, he is our friend and guide also. as far as All India Bank Employees Association is concerned, he's not, at least in Kerala, he is guiding us in all our activities, giving us his suggestions and ideas in our programs also. And one notable thing that I should mention here is, academics or scholars, usually we have got an impression they'll be dealing with data and details, sitting in solitude and dealing with primary data, secondary data, like that. But Dr. Ravi Raman is unique in that he has made field studies, whether it is a struggle. I was telling about migration or a plantation labor. He will go to the spot. He will know the issues. Then he is reacting. So empirical studies, as I will take the wordings from these academics. These studies, they are Dr. Ravi Raman is doing based on field studies, based on his personal studies, like that. He's always in the field, not sitting in some ivory tower and studying. So like that, today he'll be dealing with a very, very important subject, CHV was telling, finance capital, politics, and the emerging state. It's a very, very serious matter. I am not straying into the subject because he should tell us. So very important. We know what is global finance attacking the economies of third world countries, that we know, and the politics that is getting changed, and the state ownership or state relevance is getting drowned in these new theories. So in this context, Dr. Ravi Raman's ideas and inputs or his presentation will be very much beneficial. So with this, I welcome Dr. Ravi Raman to our webinar and also request Dr. Ravi Raman to address us. Thank you, Ravi Raman sir. Welcome.
Thanks, my friend Krishna, for your kind words. There is a small correction. I didn't teach at Oxford and Cambridge. I was a visiting scholar there. Of course, I taught at Manchester. Yeah, dear fellow participants, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak to this august audience. I'm especially grateful to Comrade Rajan Naga, President of AIBEA, Comrade C.H. Venkatachalam, General Secretary, Comrade and my friend K.S. Krishna, Joint Secretary. And I could also find some of my friends in the audience. Joseph is here, and some other friends are also here. Obviously, this audience is highly politically enlightened. The very fact that you're organizing this lecture series on the occasion of the 52nd anniversary of nationalization of banks shows your commitment to social objectives of public concern. I'm aware of the fact that more than 70 years of enhancing the health of the banking industry in India is your golden history. As part of your campaign, I am also aware of the fact that you have been able to achieve some significant developments over the years, including the Debt Recovery Tribunal, the ARC, and so on. Once again, I'm grateful for this invitation. I would like to begin this talk by briefly touching on the three elements of my talk's title. My talk's title is Finance Capital, Politics, and the State in India. I use the term finance capital in this lecture in a broad sense. I shall come to the specificities later. It consists of banking finance, financial assets and services, industrial capital, debts, and so on. All of these elements of finance capital affect our daily lives. Consequently, the economy and society are being influenced by financialization every day. In other words, we are subjected to the process of what is called everyday financialization. Since financialization has become part of everyday life, we need to know how capital, politics, and the state interact, and what exactly the outcome would be in contemporary times. So in another 30 minutes, I will explore the links between finance, capital, politics, and the Indian state, and examine the emerging nature of the Indian state. I will come up with a few political economic questions, that is the interaction of political and economic processes within Indian society as part of advancing my lecture. When I say politics, I mean politics proper, understood as an infinite form of society state synergy, building mutual trust, transparency, accountability, and so on, and also the lack of it. Politics and business have historically been intertwined in India, and mostly the formulation of economic policy has been dominated by business interests. We know that Modi's recent economic policies have benefited Indian big capital in a big way, and there is nothing new about it. As early as his rule in Gujarat, a few scholars noted that Modi was a favorite of the business class. It is true that the Indian state, both under the Congress and the BJP, has increasingly been influenced by big businesses, regardless of whether the Indian business class has captured the state or not. Coming to the third aspect in the title, the state, I should say that the state is narrower than a political system and broader than a government. State is a larger political order than government. It is in fact a delimited institutional order, if I borrow this from Rolf Miliband, a British Marxist sociologist who was considered as one of the best known academic Marxists of his generation. As Miliband acknowledges, the state cannot be adequately described. This is due to the fact that the state is not a thing. As such, it does not exist as a thing, but as an assemblage of institutions. A state may be defined in this context as a combination of institutions, or along with each other, create the system. It could better be understood as a relationship of force. In brief, the power relations. Having briefly touched upon the terms I use in my brief talk, that's very much there in the title of the talk. Let me begin with the question of finance capital in detail. First of all, I wish to draw your attention to the first major Marxist work on this. It was titled Finance Capital by Rudolf Hilferding, who participated in the German Revolution, sometimes called the November Revolution, and was a finance minister in Germany twice, first in 1923, and later during 28 to 29. He's best known for his work Finance Capital, written in 1910. And Lenin made use of his notion of finance capital in his classic work, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. You all know that. In that book, he says that capitalism in that stage of development in which the domination of monopoly and finance capital has taken shape. Hilferding explains that finance capital is the amalgam of banking, finance, and industrial capital. And it is this amalgamated form and its diversified manifestations that have influenced our life as everyday financialization. But as Lenin has straightaway stated that, look, its meaning would be complete only and only when we link this with the politics of the times, the historical times, I mean. So everyday financialization is manifested in several ways, we all know, such as an increase in finance sector, debt vis-a-vis non-financial sector debt, increase in certain forms of credit, sharp increase in mortgage debt as a proportion to GDP, or an increase in household debt again as a proportion to GDP, increase in share of finance, insurance, real estate, increase in financial innovations with the new forms of bonds, shares, stocks, derivatives, and so on. Rise in the financial sector profit to total profit, and so on. So we would all be interested to know what exactly the source of funds would be for such diversified financial sectors. In fact, several sources are available. Hilferding himself identified the hoarded money of the wealthy classes as a major source of funding way back in 1910. I told you he wrote the book in 1910. Also in contemporary times, hoarded money would be a major source of funding, but it's the other sources that are more important, which would include the national savings, say the household and corporate savings, its transformation into financial assets such as stocks, bonds, debentures, etc., as well as the corporate surplus and loans. There is also the reinvested surplus generated in the economy, which may carry with it rentier interest. So during the cycle of the circulation and an ever-expanding supply of financial instruments, finance capital multiplies. Finance capital multiplies. It is evident from the fact that first, the share of financial assets in the total assets of the economy increases, and second, the share of financial assets vis-a-vis physical assets as a proportion to GDP also would increase in this process. And this that is the finance capital becomes the key resource in the economy. So it is growing at a rate that is as fast as the economy in India. Reforms have been implemented in the finance sector, especially since the sector was opened up since the 90s. There are many financial products and services introduced in the economy since the 90s. However, we know that the banking sector holds more than 60% of the country's financial assets. The growth of the capital market is also impressive in a country like India, whether it is in the form of government securities or corporate bonds. In a keynote address in November 2020, the Governor of Reserve Bank of India, Sri Shaktidananda Das, said capital account convertibility would be a continued process rather than an event, even as the country had progressed quite considerably in its quest towards full convertibility. So what happens is that there is a continuous expansion of finance capital in India. Well, for scaling up of corporatization or large investments would be required, necessitating large investment credits. And in this process, banks also acquire investment banking functions and obtain promoters' profit. So anyway, what's happening is that this amalgam of banking and industrial capital, that is the finance capital at one end, and at another level, a diversification of financial products. And together, they become the key feature of the contemporary stage of capitalism in India. We ask a few political economy questions here. Question number one, who benefited from this? Who benefited from this expanding scale of finance capital? Or how was benefits distributed? Is what the question is. Following liberalization in India, the finance sector was deregulated and diversified. But in this case, my question is, to whom were the risks transferred and at what price? Well, as a result of the opening economy, I said that this has happened. But apart from that, there also occurred a big, what is called, productivity gains in the finance sector. That is, the finance sector has also registered a significant rise in productivity gain. It has been demonstrated that not only the share of finance capital increased, but also its productivity increased in the finance sector, both in corporate and non-corporate finance sectors. We know that intermediation costs have decreased over the years, which implies a decrease in total operating costs as a percentage of total assets. Total operating profits also increased. Additionally, the total operating costs as a percentage of total income have also declined since liberalization. So my political economy question is, who benefited from this and how was it distributed? We understand that borrowers and depositors alike did not gain anything or did not gain much. Rajeshwari Sengupta and Harshvardhan 2017 and 2020, Sen and Dasgupta 2018 provide insightful studies to this effect. The study reveals that for several years together, despite growing at over 15%, Indian banking did not add to net employment. In fact, employment even fell across both private and public sector banks. Further, the employees do not appear to have benefited from the productivity gains, given their wage growth has been consistently lower than the growth in banking business. What does it mean? It simply means that there is, first of all, wage productivity gap. Secondly, this productivity gap widens over the years. Altogether, it suggests that the productivity gains enjoyed by the finance sector went to the defaulting borrowers. There is a class bias inherent in this entire distribution of benefits in the ever-expanding chain of finance capital. That's the point. The distribution is not only skewed, but also skewed toward the already wealthy sections. More importantly, it is in favor of those defaulting borrowers who are not subjected to criminal offenses. In brief, the vast expansion of the finance capital is primarily benefiting, that is, the owners of these financial institutions, including the banks, then the corporations and wealthy shareholders, and not the state or ordinary people. This leads us to the political economy question number 2. Who are these defaulting borrowers? Since the AIBEA brought up the issue of willful defaulters back in 2001, it was a historic moment, I would say. I really wish to congratulate AIBEA again and again in this context. I mean, it was AIBEA who first brought up this issue to the public. And ever since, there has always been a public demand for the release of the list of willful defaulters. We know that it took RBI 4 years to comply with the Supreme Court order to release India's willful defaulters list. There are top corporates such as Adani Reliance, SR, GVK, Bhushan, JP Group, Vedanta, and so on. I mean, the list of willful defaulters at different times. Reports suggest, again based on RBI data, that gross non-performing assets under Narendra Modi's NDA are nearly 365% higher than what banks had to endure under the UPA. It is revealed that the public sector banks have written off a huge amount of bad loans or unpaid debts in the recent years. There is a 21-time jump, I think it was reported in the Indian Express, between 2008 and 2008 and 14 and 2014 and 20. From 2014 to 2019-20, NPS for PSBs rose to nearly, say, rupees 18 lakh crore, up from nearly rupees 5 lakh crore in the UPA era. Over the last 6 years alone, PSBs have written off bad loans worth around 7 lakh crore, a massive increase from 32,000 crore incurred from 2008 to 2014. Several reports suggest that NPS under Modi's NDA are much, much higher than what banks experienced under the Congress-led government, that is UPA. Indian state was so busy writing off unpaid corporate debt and recapitalizing the banks that it did not extend such assistance to the farmers or vulnerable social sections. It clearly demonstrates the state's corporate bias. The Indian state could not do much in recovering the NPA. Instead, it continued to recapitalize it. The 2016 Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code has not been effective at all. This takes us to the political economy question number 3. How is this recapitalization of banks going and what are its implications? As the profits of the banks, you all know well, were diverted to write off bad loans to a certain extent, and when it is insufficient, the government steps in to recapitalize the banks. It is the government that recapitalizes when they are unable to operate their business within their existing resources. I mean, the banks, when the banks are unable to do this. In India, 70% of bank loans are accounted for PSBs, accounted for by PSBs, and 90% of NPS are accounted for by them. Firstly, further, it is all, I mean, in order to know what happens when we go for this sort of recapitalization, is that it is better to know a bit about some other country experiences. I think in order to save time, I will just take one example, the Greek experiment. The Greek, in the case of Greece, it is important to note what really happened. The Greek government has recapitalized 4 major private banks with public funds since 2010. In fact, the government should have nationalized those banks, but instead it had to sell their shares not only at a ridiculously low prices, but also to external firms, US-based firms, and also foreign hedge funds with far-reaching implications. So the non-performing assets were accumulated in the case of India, coming back to India, as a result of basically the nexus between the corporates and the banks, frequently mediated through government bureaucracy, which you all know, through various means such as the interlocking, what is called interlocking of director boards, flotation of shares on the stock market, supervision of corporate projects, or what is called the commitment relations within codes, emerge and banks receive profits in return. So corporations and banks are becoming more closely involved in each other's operations and governance, and banks have become closely entangled with corporations and allows corporates to loot the public assets and resources. and also the government with the government support. This takes us to the next question. I think the question number 4. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think it is question number 4. How do we understand this nexus between corporate capital and political parties in the larger political system? The codependency between corporate capital and the ruling class is quite clear. Over the years, it has been very strong. The Indian state encourages the participation of business tycoons in the legislature and parliament, influencing government legislative decisions, public policy decisions, building institutions that suit their interests, and more importantly, shaping government policy. In the Rajya Sabha, we all know the presence of business tycoons like Ambani and Vijay Mallya in very historical phases. According to one study, prior to 1991, 14.2% of Lok Sabha MPs belonged to the business class. Their representation increased to 26% by 2014. Most of them belonged to either the BJP or the Congress. Imagine that Vijay Mallya gained support first from the Congress, then from the Janata Dal, and then from the BJP. What's more, no one will admit it now. Apart from crony capitalism that works through underhand dealings, several forms of collusive deals are worked out and often practiced through public policies. After 2014, in the Indian big capitals, representation in legislative bodies increased again, showing that the state is increasingly dominated by Indian big capital. Those who are in the parliament or such legislative institutions continue to tilt the public policies in their favor. Further, there has been an unholy alliance between banks and corporations in almost all bank episodes. Names, namely like Nirav Modi, Harshad Mehta, come to mind. Vijay Mallya's properties were confiscated, but the Indian banking system continue to face several regressive features. Not less than 60% of the directors of government companies, for instance, are BJP ideologues. Even the RBI is under pressure. As some scholars point out, even the BJP supporters are included in its governance. I must say that government is also heavily influenced by business organizations, such as the old generation FICCI and the new gen business organizations such as CII, ASOCHAM, and so on. In fact, CII was one of the prime movers of liberalization of the 90s. Political system continue to accommodate the interests of corporate capital, and it also opens up spaces for reciprocal arrangements, such as the electoral bonds. As always, when corporations or corporate capitalism were in crisis, the state would pump additional resources into them. In order to revive and stabilize capitalism, the state takes particular initiatives. Capitalism, on the other hand, failed to reciprocate as expected. Historically, it has been so. You take the case of 1930s depression. I mean, the corporate capital was supported by the state. But when the capital revived, when capitalism revived, say for instance, the golden age of capitalism from Second World War to the late 60s, the 25 years of golden age of capitalism. At that time, capitalism was in a very prosperous phase, but it didn't respond, it doesn't reciprocate the demands of the workers. And that's one of the reasons why there were so many trade unions coming up in the UK and other places in Europe. That's why there were a whole lot of strikes taking place in the 50s and 60s in Europe. So what happens is that whenever capitalism was in crisis, they wouldn't they would be subsidized by the government, and they would transfer that crisis to the workers. But whenever capitalism was in a very prosperous phase, they refused to share those prosperity, that sort of prosperity with the workers or with the state. This is a very different kind of paradox that we need to register. We all know what really happened in the case of COVID. The corporate sector did not only refuse to join the state. Of course, state itself was in crisis, moral economy crisis. But the corporate capital continued to extract more surplus from labor. How? By suspending labor laws during the COVID crisis. As a state allows the corporate to suspend the labor laws, it is a crucial component of the state. As it is outside the law, the state becomes an exceptional state. If I borrow from Nikos Palantzas, he was a very famous what is called a French Marxist, who was involved in a debate with Ralph Miliband in the 80s. Or it could even be called as a state of exception, if you want to borrow this idea from Giorgio Agamben, the Italian philosopher. Anyway, let me go to the last question, perhaps, or last but one question, I think, to the question of forthcoming reforms, particularly the question of denationalization. The nationalization of banks in '69, we all know, gave India control over banking finance, credit capital, which enabled the government to plan its future performance. After nationalization, the breadth and scope of the Indian banking sector expanded at a rate perhaps unmatched by any other country. I mean, big scholars like Nobel laureate Chatterjee, Abhijit Banerjee, and others agree with this. Indian banking has been remarkably successful at achieving mass participation. And more importantly, priority sector lending was strengthened with more branches in rural areas. Nevertheless, this dominance of government over bank finance weakened over time as the government accommodated, as I said, more and more of private banks, new gen banks, and finance capital since the 90s. And finally, the government became dependent on foreign direct investments, particularly portfolio investments. The state lost control over finance capital in itself in this process. Throughout history, the position of corporate capital has behaved like that. It has shifted. Initially, it has been accommodated, and eventually it has become hegemonic. As a result of this process, the relative power or the relative autonomy of the state weakened. And this takes us to another question. What would be the outcome of this proposed idea of denationalization? Privatization of PSBs would be accomplished by diluting ownership, which would include selling of shares or by making the bank subsidiaries of other institutions, partial privatization or outright closure, and so on. All in the nature of closing the fiscal deficit. The government should become a minor shareholder and disinvest. PSBs are getting diluted, allows 49% now, allows 20% for foreign equities, but this is going to be further diluted. An important part of FDI is portfolio investment, which involves quick money, speculative activities, and is not directly related to the real economy. In order to understand the outcome of this what is called denationalization, the proposed sort of denationalization, I think better to learn experience of the UK in this context as well. Following the end of the Second World War, a Labour government, we all know, was elected in July 1945 in the UK with Clement Attlee as Prime Minister. The nationalization process began, resulting in state ownership of major utilities, heavy industries, transport, notably the railroads and like that. This was a post-war consensus, a consensus between the political parties and the people, between the parties and the industrialists. The law remained in effect until the 70s. The Conservatives, under the leadership of Margaret Thatcher, won the 1979 general election. When Thatcher's Conservative won the election, nationalized industries represented 10% of the economy and 14% of capital investment. British Airways, British Telecom, British Steel, and British Gas all sold out after Thatcher coming into power. By the time Thatcher left office in 90, the damage had already been done. More than 40 UK state-owned companies employing 6 lakh workers had been privatized. So billions worth of public assets have been sold. And this was the outcome of Thatcher's, what is called the privatization strategy. And the impact was also quite clear that so much inflation, so much unemployment, and Britain, in fact, has become again the sick man of Europe. So what I'm trying to say is that the BJP has laid out its roadmap for consolidation and privatization. Think of the privatization of the aviation industry and other public enterprises in India, including airports. Private companies are buying up major airports. This is despite the fact that most of them are profitable. It's also despite the fact that the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Transport, Tourism, Culture had already unanimously warned against privatization of airports way back in 2013. It is also worth noting that most of the private bidders, including Adani Enterprises, are mobilizing capital, not from internal resources, but from external financial entities. And in India, it is the public sector banks whose funds are canalized by the corporates, including Adani's. There is a hurry for the Modi government to disinvest and sell the profit-making PSUs and Maharatnas. All of them are profit-making organizations. They have survived the rigors of globalization and liberalization while continuing to earn profits. Certainly, people would like to know what the company disinvestment and sold. Justification must always be rational. A company like Petroleum Corporation Limited also offered for strategic disinvestment, and other companies, ONGC, IOC, GAIL, and TPC, all are disappearing, fast disappearing. We are really shocked that LIC, the largest company based on, is being put up for sale. In a paradoxical sense, Modi's government seems unwilling even to learn from the US. I would like to mention that, which has a strategic, what is called a public sector. It is also not ready to learn from China or Singapore, where you find the strategic public sector still very active. So several arguments put forward for legitimizing privatization right, I would say are not valid. But they forget the fact that there is understanding with respect to priority sector, and there would also be private bank would also join the fact that, at the end of the day, you would find that the loans would be very expensive and it wouldn't be available for the priority sectors and like that. So we have lessons to learn from the consolidation of banks, mergers, and acquisitions. As a result of the banks' loss, their historically developed regional character. In addition to losing jobs, it exacerbates regional disparities in development. Until SBI and SPT merged, I should say that the CD ratio of SPT was as high as 70%. It was 70 plus. But now for the SBI in a state like Kerala, it is hardly 45%. In many states, there is a drain of wealth that drops the regions where surplus is produced. So if a region which produces surplus is deprived of its own surplus, then it is bound to underdevelop. That's a history. That's a history that we have. So mergers would also reduce the choice of the customers. More importantly, the customers will be subjected to the imposed conditionalities of the monopoly banks. This is one of the shortest routes to monopoly capitalism. So mergers and acquisitions have increased the operating profit of several banks. Even those operating profits are diverted to sectors that favor the corporate sector at the end of the day. I will come to my last sort of a thing, because at the moment, the government also makes the argument that, look, we need more foreign funding because that's why we go for foreign direct investment and like that. Because that's a general argument for inviting FDI. That is a scarcity of internal resources of capital, which I would say is false. The Indian state should be ready to mobilize resources from within, from the corporate sector, and new emergent forms of new taxes should be mobilized. In contrast, the effective rate for domestic corporates, inclusive of surcharges, has been reduced over the years. Recently, it was reduced from 34.94% to 25.17%. For new manufacturing firms set up after October 1, 2019, it is reduced from 29.1% to 17%. At this statutory rate, the corporate tax in India is lower than the global average. But look at Biden administration. The Biden administration wants to move the corporate tax rate in the US to 28% from 21%. To help what? To help fund its large stimulus plan. With the introduction of global minimum tax, perhaps the countries like UK, Germany, and France, corporate tax collections would increase. India also may benefit out of it. But within India, I would say there is every chance, there is much potential for an increase in corporate tax. And how about the property tax and other new forms of tax? I don't know how many of you are aware of the fact that at present the property tax in India is as low as 0.2% of GDP, as against around 3% in advanced countries. It is estimated, further it is estimated that there are millions of houses and flats vacant in various parts for years together. An additional tax of rupees 2 per square feet per year would yield tax revenue of thousands of crores. And how about inheritance wealth tax? We all know that in India, inheritance tax, also known as estate tax, was imposed until 1985 and was payable when the property was transferred to the heirs. The inherited wealth tax was also in force until 2015. It is time to reintroduce the inheritance tax as one of the instruments to address the rising inequality in the country. And the state should spend more money on education, health, and and for employment generation. A high-level committee on health reported to the 15th Finance Commission that the public expenditure on health should be increased to 2.5% of GDP. But we know that even during the COVID crisis, it is hardly 1%. The expenditure on education is equally low. India's unemployment rate reached an all-time high of 23.52% in April 2020, owing to COVID-19 conditions. And we don't find any counter-cyclical measures coming up from the government of India. Let me come to the larger political economy questions broadly. I may take 5 minutes, 5 minutes maximum. The bourgeoisie, or the corporate capital class is, by and large, or historically, is willing to sacrifice democracy in times of crisis. It might embrace, neo-fascism to support a new constellation of power relations. Louis Bonaparte abolished the republic, and at that time Marx concludes that bourgeois class is willing to sacrifice democracy in times of crisis. We are now witnessing how the Indian state and the corporate capital is sacrificing democracy. How democratic institutions are made valueless. Everything is made valueless. There is devaluing of labor. There is devaluing of peasants and small farmers. There is devaluing of federal values. And there is devaluing of citizenship. We all know that. And the labor laws were suspended in various states just for protecting the interests of the real estate owners and corporates. Well, in India, several such things take on exceptional forms. Exceptional forms, because the demolition of Bamari Masjid in 92, Ram Janmabhoomi in 2000, were all examples of exceptional state forms. The bourgeoisie was not perturbed by these actions. The CAA also involves exceptional state forms. So the corporate state alliance, that is the intertwining of religion and politics, reinterpretation of constitutional rights, electoral populism, and so on, could act as new modalities of state power with corporate fascist potential. In contrast to historical events of fascism, the Indian state power makes use of the crisis for nurturing its incipient ideological position and move towards a corporate fascist state. If it is suggested that German fascism represents a solution to the crisis of capitalist society, my claim in this talk is that the very incipient fascist elements take advantage of the crisis to feed themselves to corporate fascist states, to become the corporate fascist state. Throughout India, the anti-CAA protest showed that the state of exception does not extend only to the domain of economics, but also to other crucial areas, such as citizenship. It is not the topic of the talk today, so I will not elaborate beyond mentioning that the state identity is changing in India. But what is more important for us is to know if the change favors corporate capital or labor or the ordinary people. Changing nature occurs on two levels in the Indian context. The interest of corporate capital with the predatory interest is being accommodated more and more at the expense of people's interests as well. It is accommodating the interest of Hindu nationalists with a plurality of elites. We see the emergence of a corporate Hindu state at the end of the day. My hope is that an organization like AIBEA continues to fight against the growing corporate Hindu state. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. RaviRaman. It was not only educative, but it was inspiring, because what you explained is the basic ethos of the All India Bank Employees Association. What we believe, what our leaders taught us, what our leaders asked us to practice in the organization. You have explained it in such a wonderful academic manner. And we are reinforced in our understanding of the days ahead, the challenges ahead, and the tasks ahead. As you very rightly explained, a simple litmus test is India is changing, but in whose interest? As you rightly said, and our experience, daily life experience shows that India is changing to the benefit of the richer class, the elites, the bourgeoisie, and against the interest of the working class, the downtrodden people and the common people. So it was simply superb and excellent, very, very illustrative, very, very educative, very inspiring. Thank you so much. And we shall definitely further interact with you. And we can assure you that All India Bank Employees Association, not only on the issue of banking issues, but in the general issues also, we shall be with the people, we shall be with the forces which are fighting to save democracy and the country at large. Thank you so much, Dr. RaviRaman, for your wonderful lecture today. And I would request Comrade Krishna to formally extend the vote of thanks. Today is the culminating day, and it is really a diamond studded lecture today. Thank you so much. We are highly, we are very, very happy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir. Your presentation was excellent. And you presented a very big picture of the issues, whether it is politics or finance or emerging stage. It's a big picture. Of course, certain points we have to reread from your presentations, because whatever you have spoken here, we have recorded, and it is in the it will be in the YouTube as well as in the Facebook also. We will go through again, and very rightly in conclusion also, certain things you have prophesized actually, but fortunately the people of India, they have to understand the whole picture in the proper way, so that educative campaign from as citizens also or mass organizations we will carry forward. And yesterday, our former governor of Reserve Bank of India had written an article in Times of India. Dr. RaviRaman used to frequently write in Times of India on various subjects. So he was telling, see, the whole finance that has come into the India during this pandemic period, instead of going to productive sectors, they have gone to share market only. That you also pointed out. So it is not productive finance, but finance that is trying to make quick profits in the present situation. So that was one point. And another point is that minimum governance, maximum governance. That is the slogan of the governments. So government is withdrawing from everything, and they are allowing corporates to rule the country. So that is also widening the inequality in this country. A former governor of the Reserve Bank is also lamenting. So that is the situation. So on this day, the 1972 Nationalization Act with regard to insurance companies, that is getting amended. Today, a bill is tabled in the parliament also. So that is another situation. And so we are very much thankful to you for having taken much pains, because you didn't come on a casual way. You prepared a text also. So you presented also. So we are very much indebted to you. And on behalf of All India Bank Employees Association, we thank you profusely for your presentation and participation. Thank you so much, sir.